Bienvenidos nuevamente a Desafíate. Hoy día estoy con una tremenda invitada. Ella se llama Cathy O Dowd, es una escaladora, alpinista, autora y oradora motivacional sudafricana. Ella es la primera mujer, escuchen bien, en coronar el monte Everest desde las dos caras, norte y sur. Bienvenida, welcome to Desafíate. Bienvenida a Desafíate, Cathy O Dowd. How are you doing today?
It's lovely to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, I have some questions for you that I would love you to tell us. Me encantaría hacer varias preguntas a ti hoy día. Y la primera es,
¿cómo te preparas mentalmente para una expedición de gran dificultad? How you prepare yourself for a very difficult expedition? How do you mentally prepare yourself?
Well, preparation comes in three categories, of which mental is one, but there's no doubt that doing the other two correctly feeds into mental confidence. So there's physical strength and fitness, which is what most people think about. There's skill. These are not easy. There's a whole lot of technical skills, from navigation to avalanche recognition to use of ropes, ice axes, crampons, etc., that you need to understand and be able to do skillfully and rapidly. And then there's the mental component, which of course is the most vague, the hardest to get your head around. And I think it rests on a couple of things. One is knowledge, as far as that's available to you. So it's about reading everything you can about the mountain, looking at the videos, looking at the maps, looking at the satellite photographs. You're trying to create a mental image of this challenge and being able to mentally place yourself in the space so that you can think of yourself as a person who is capable of moving and managing that space. And then it's about having confidence in your previous skill and your previous experience, because you don't know what to expect. The best you can do is turn up with skill and experience and the ability to adapt those quickly and creatively to whatever problem you overcome or you encounter. So that relies on previous experience. You can't go from 0 to 100 with this kind of project. You do need to work your way up to this. And then I think perhaps possibly the third thing that's important is a group of people. Not necessarily your best friends. We're not talking about that sort of emotional connection, but where there's trust and respect, where you know that both that you are contributing, but also that you can rely on the people around you, and together you will seek out solutions to whatever unexpected problem you encounter.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great answer. Great one. There's a lot of thoughts there.
Hay muchos pensamientos, muchas reflexiones de valor en lo que acabas de decir. And I think, imagino que durante el ascenso hay mucho silencio.
¿Qué te dices a ti misma en esos momentos? I imagine that during, the expedition, there's a lot of silence. What do you say to yourself in those moments of silence?
I think the thing is, I like silence. I'm perfectly comfortable with silence. So I don't find that stressful. In fact, frankly, on expeditions, the teammate who just talks and talks and talks and talks and talks is incredibly stressful. When you can't escape each other physically, you've got to give people mental privacy and space. So I enjoy silence. It's one of the reasons I like these deep wilderness projects. And within that space, sometimes I'm simply living in the space in which I'm operating, which is normally somewhere of great beauty. Sometimes I'm drifting in my head. I have written some wonderful novels in my head, which I will never actually write in practice. So sometimes I let my mind drift somewhere else as a chance to escape for a while. And sometimes when it's difficult and grinding, not so much complex, because then you're completely focused. But when it's just grinding and repetitive, in moments like that, I'll probably be doing some kind of count in my head. Not from 1 to 1,000, more like a rhythm. You're just trying to keep yourself in the space, keep yourself moving forward, set very short-term goals and tick them off, sort of kind of every 5 minutes, one more down, making progress, but not looking too far ahead because it's so slow.
How many hours does it take to get maybe to the summit? Well, maybe a lot of months, maybe for Everest, but in other ones, in other expeditions.
It depends entirely what's happening and where you are on the mountain. But it's possible that you have a 20-hour day, particularly, the sort of the key days of an expedition. So you may be putting in many more hours than you normally would, with both intense physical exercise, but also having to be thoroughly focused on one hand about the safety and on the other hand about anticipating the unexpected problem. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of high focus over a long period of time. And that's really quite difficult.
So you mentioned little steps that gets you to a certain point where you can
see the summit closer. So what about these little steps? What have you learned about these little steps? Tú mencionaste que los pequeños pasos te acercan a una meta un poco más alta y te van acercando a la cima. ¿Qué puedes decirme acerca de estos pequeños pasos?
I think they're absolutely essential. They are the building blocks of our success. I've seen a lot of people be very fixated on the big final goal, in this case, the summit of a mountain, and then get undermined by how far away it is and how slow they are in making progress. And that is not productive. A good deal of the time on the mountain, frankly, you're either waiting because of bad weather or the need to acclimatize or poor snow conditions, whatever it is. And quite a lot of the time, you're going back down. You need to fetch more equipment. You need to retreat so that your body can continue to adapt. There are a whole lot of reasons you spend a good deal of the project going in the wrong direction, but that's part of the reality. And for someone who's only putting value on the final outcome, it's hard to stay motivated. I think it's really important to do two things. The one is to break it down into these much smaller chunks. And that's on a whole lot of levels. You can be just working day by day from camp to camp. Within a day, you could be ticking off the hours one by one. You could be just setting your eyes on, the next shadow across the snow, the next rock in the distance, whatever it is. You could be running a count in your head, and every time you hit 100, it's one more done. It's about setting yourself up for a set of running small successes that help you keep a sense of forward progress. And the other thing that's important, I think, is actually to stop, not just because we do actually need to rest, but to look backwards. Because again, if you're endlessly looking forwards, the mountain is almost always bigger than you until that final couple of hours when you get to the top. It's when you turn around and look back down that you realize how far away the bottom of the mountain has become. That's when you get a sense of height, of progress, of success. And I think stopping to look back, appreciate and celebrate the progress you've made already is very helpful in turning around like, okay.
So celebrating victories is as important, see?
Immediate successes. There should always be more than one goal. It's not just summit or failure. You should be racking up successes as you move through a project.
Mm-hmm. And how this last thought has impacted your other areas of your life, because it's a very profound thought.
My big mountain projects have had enormous, almost entirely positive impact on the rest of my life. They have been a place where I've built great confidence, both mentally and physically, in the type of challenge I can succeed at, the type of problems I can overcome, the type of difficulties that I can endure. And I've been able to take that into other areas. I also think there's an interesting sense in which these projects of kind of extreme physical endurance and risk management, they're like a small, exaggerated version of the kind of project management most of us do in our jobs and also just in our personal lives. Because the timeline is shorter, the goal is clearer, the risks are exaggerated, and they come back to you quickly. So although perhaps it seems dangerous, it's also in some ways simpler. And in kind of understanding how to manage these mountain projects, I've been able to take sort of some fundamental ideas back to our more complex, longer running business and life projects. And frankly, I think that's why businesses bring people like me in to talk about project management, team dynamics, goal achievement, because my case studies are this kind of simplified, exaggerated, dramatic version of the more complex projects that are being run within a business. So I think there's a lot to be gained. There's a reason why so many top executives do some version of extreme endurance sport as their way of relaxing. There's a lot to be learned by doing it.
Oh, great. Great answer. Well, what does it mean for you, the Everest, in your life? ¿Qué significa el Everest para ti en tu vida?
It's almost entirely positive, but not 100%. So Everest, in the big picture, it was an extraordinary opportunity. By going, particularly on my first Everest expedition, but then also the subsequent ones, I opened so many doors. I allowed myself to build a career, a life, a place to live, a way of living that I could never have imagined. It has given me so much success, so much flexibility, so many opportunities. So in that sense, it was an extraordinary stroke of luck to kind of have the chance to be part of that. Mm-hmm. That being said, possibly like a lot of people who have a big success quite early on in their adult life, you can feel as if it's this anchor holding you back. And I've gone on and lived many years and done many other things. And to some extent, there's always this pull back to Everest. You're like, God, that was a long time ago. You know, I've done other stuff. So sometimes it's felt a little bit like an anchor to the past. And of course, the third thing about Everest that's interesting is how it's changed in my lifetime. I came in at the beginning of the modern era. We were just beginning to get more teams on the mountain, but we were still basically doing it traditional style. We were a national expedition of amateur climbers, but you don't go with a guide. You know, you work it out yourselves. Nowadays, it's a commercial undertaking. It's clients paying very large amounts of money to professional guides who've got Sherpas putting a fixed safety line from base camp to the summit. You know, it really is very different. It's now a safe, commercial, money-making opportunity. So watching Everest change over these years has been a little disappointing, perhaps.
Well, but it was a very first point where to start. Fue un buen punto de inicio, muy buen punto de inicio para ti, ¿no?
Exactly. And I think it's a good lesson in that as well. You cannot spend the rest of your life sort of trying to rely on one single success. You have to move forward. You have to accept that it'll move into the past. The world will change. They'll lose interest in whatever was your moment. And you need to keep moving forward, setting new challenges, doing new things, learning new skills.
So keep moving forward. What does it mean then, Nanga Parbat? Si este punto es tan importante de movernos hacia nuevos desafíos, ¿qué significa para ti entonces Nanga Parbat?
Well, Nanga Parbat, which is the name of the 9th highest mountain in the world, which is one of the 8,000 meter peaks, was the most difficult Himalayan expedition I ever did. And it would never have happened without Everest at the beginning, but it was much more challenging. And the reason it was so challenging is the mountain is nearly as high. And remember that these mountains are enormous. So there are many different ways of approaching them. And in this case, I was part of a team and we were trying to climb a route that no one had ever managed to do before. So if you think about Everest as now having a fixed safety line and a queue of several hundred people lined up one behind another, so that's very predictable. And the other extreme is going to a mountain and you just see a line in the distance, but you've got no idea. There's no one else there. There's no one going ahead of you. There's no line of people. There's no safety rope. You have to go in, you and your team as pioneers, and try and work out where to go, what will work. When it goes wrong, you've got to backtrack, find a new line, start again, look for another approach. And you've got to do all of this with no help from anyone else, climbing what we call alpine style, which is very lightweight. So this is, on one hand, much more difficult, but on the other hand, much more interesting, because this is truly challenging. You aren't walking the footsteps of anyone else. This is being a pioneer. This is saying, we don't know if this thing is possible, but we are the people who think we're going to try.
Wow. Being a pioneer, I love that sentence. And since you're a pioneer, what is the most valuable of building up or creating this new route? Siendo tú una pionera, ¿cierto? Y que has abierto estas nuevas rutas, ¿qué es lo más valioso para ti de abrir estas nuevas expediciones?
I think the most valuable learning point out of these kind of pioneering projects is the incredible importance of being flexible. So you have to have a good plan. So you need to have done all of the research and all the planning, and you come onto the mountain with an idea of exactly how you hope it will go based on your research. But when you're a pioneer, that's not the truth. That's just the best circumstance. And you may well find that reality goes off somewhere completely different. And you have to let go of a plan that you've spent months, maybe years working on, and start to simply rely on your skill, your ability, your creativity to build a new plan day by day as you get new information. That's really difficult. Not least because it's quite tricky to see the difference between being flexible and just not knowing what you're doing, going round and round in circles. Mm-hmm. And if you're a leader, it's quite difficult to convey to your team why you need to be changing the plan, and that, yes, you still do know where you're going. It's just you're going to have to adapt how you get there. So all of this takes you into the most difficult areas of project management and team management. And I think learning around that is incredibly valuable.
Is this a very important thought today, where we have to face a very not known world? There's a lot of uncertainty going, the change, accelerated change, and all these forces that get us to a world where we cannot anticipate what's going to happen. Is this skill that you learn in these new expeditions have prepared yourself for this new world? Esta cualidad o habilidad que has adquirido de poder crear, ¿cierto? Y de flexibilizar tus rutas en el proceso de la expedición, se parece un poco a este mundo que estamos enfrentando, en el que hay mucha incertidumbre, hay cambio acelerado y por lo tanto esta habilidad que has desarrollado te ha ayudado a enfrentar este nuevo mundo. Is this true? What do you think about this?
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting because on one hand, you've got people who choose to do this. So in the mountain climbing world, you know, we're volunteers. In the world of business, this is the space of the startups. And they call it pivoting, where they're having to kind of change their structure as they meet the reality of the market. And they chose to be in that space. But there's no doubt that a great many companies that would prefer to just keep on doing what they've been doing successfully for the last 10 years, the last 25 years, are discovering we're now in a space, because we're so globalized, something that happens over there affects you over here. Because things move so quickly, a plan that was valid for a short time becomes obsolete much faster than before. And of course, because we then get the completely unexpected, like COVID, where everybody's plans are just destroyed overnight. So you may well be part of a company that didn't want to have to deal with this level of uncertainty, but that's the world we now live in. But it is the same, you know, whether you've volunteered for it and you're interested in that, or whether you'd rather it wasn't like this, but, you know, there's no way out. It's the same challenge, which is somehow to keep your eye on what you're truly trying to achieve, what the long-term goal is, the one that really matters. And at the same time, be much more flexible about the route you take to achieve those goals. Don't stay wedded to some plan that is now out of date or inappropriate to current circumstances. So yeah, it's the same set of skills.
I think we need to go to your expeditions then to be prepared. We need to be your learners. We're gonna join.
Yeah, maybe don't join one for real, because those really are pretty difficult. But I do have a way of bringing them to you. What I do with some of my corporate clients is kind of take them on an expedition like a case study. And rather than just have them listen, each time we reach a key decision-making moment, I actually put the choice to the audience and say, this information, under pressure, we need to choose, what would you do? And actually get the audience to vote, look at why people choose this over that, look at some of the unconscious biases that lie behind our decision-making processes. It's actually a really interesting way of going through the exercise of making choices in very uncertain circumstances.
Well, I love that methodology. Very creative. We'll have to talk about that then later. I have a last question. Is maybe in your, I don't know, 20, 25 years of climbing and being the woman that you are now, and in your experience of the expeditions, what has been the most complex moment and how do you solve it? Siendo una mujer que ya tiene más de 20 años en esta actividad, ¿cuál ha sido el momento más desafiante y cómo resolviste ese momento?
Well, I think the most difficult set of decisions I've ever had to make, and I'm afraid this is not a story that ends with some great moment of success. Truly difficult decisions, sometimes there's no good solution. You're just trying to pick the least bad one. We were very high on Everest, literally on the summit day, incredibly early in the morning, a very cold day. And we came across a woman on her own, dying on the mountainside. And she has a long backstory to how she ended up there alone, but she'd been up there for a very long time. And she was in the last hours of her life. And we stopped the expedition to try and help her. And this is where it gets really difficult, because in the city, people think of help as, well, you call professionals. You call the ambulance, you call the police, and then somebody else takes over. But on mountains, this remote, there is no one else. There's no one to call. And to get someone to help could be days of work, really difficult. So we realized quite quickly that the resources we had were unlikely to save her. And that by staying with her, we were increasingly putting our own team in danger, real danger of dying from hypothermia. And then you have to start to make choices. Who do you prioritize in that situation? How much risk do you take with your own team in a case that's increasingly looking like it's completely hopeless? And those kinds of choices are very, very difficult. And there was no happy ending. She did die on the mountain.
Mm-hmm. Well, what is next? Thank you for sharing this. Since I think in our life we have to take those decisions, and sometimes we have to decide for two good choices, and sometimes a choice like this very painful, but a lot of learning also. And what is next for Cathy O Dowd? How does she project herself the next 10 years? ¿Cómo se proyecta Cathy O Dowd y qué es lo que viene para Cathy en estos próximos 10 años?
Well, in the last couple of years, obviously the whole sort of full stop of COVID aside, I've moved away to some extent from the big mountains. I don't particularly like the extraordinary explosion of commercial climbing on the big mountains. I've got no interest in being on the in the queues. And what actually interests me is taking my skill sets and continuing to expand them by moving them into a somewhat different environment. So I lost 2 expeditions last year because of COVID. One would have been a sailing trip down to Antarctica to then go and try and do unclimbed mountains on skis on the Antarctic Peninsula. I don't know whether that will happen in the future. It's a very expensive project. So that might have been lost. The other project, which looks like it is going ahead probably this August, is a sea kayaking expedition along the coast of Greenland. So on one hand, this builds on my expedition experience, my cold weather experience. On the other hand, it takes us into a completely new realm, which is operating at sea, operating out of tiny boats, still in a small team, still exploratory, still completely self-sufficient. Everything we need in our kayaks, just camping wild along the coastline of Greenland. And in fact, I've just come back from doing a kayak trip around the coast of Menorca, which is one of the islands in the Mediterranean. Obviously a lot warmer than Greenland, no icebergs, not having to paddle wearing dry suits, but still a chance to do some sustained multi-day expedition paddling. So yeah, it's that idea, staying in beautiful wild environments, using the skills I already have, but also expanding my skill set and finding challenges in new areas.
Well, we want to read the book, the 3rd book of Cathy O Dowd next year. To read, to take all these experiences for us. Well, thank you for being with us. Muchas gracias, Cathy. Tremenda invitada en Desafíate, nos ha inspirado en todas estas experiencias, así que thank you so much for being with us en Desafíate.
Era un gran placer para mí también. Gracias.